But this strategy, I think, is significant because it really reflects a shift in the focus away from allowing commitments to cybersecurity from being voluntary or letting market forces dictate how industry in particular adopts cybersecurity and how it employs it. This is really now saying that requirements and adherence to standards are going to be the norm going forward. We've started seeing this already in some areas.
All right. So, hey, Matt, hi. My name is Augustine. I am the editor-in-chief for the Cyber Express, and this edition is called the Security Team. So, everyone else, I think, who are watching this, please join me in welcoming Matt to the Cyber Express. So, Matt, you are from Titania. So could you basically brief me a little bit about your role at Titania and what exactly does Titania do?
Sure. So thank you firstly, Augustine, for having me. I appreciate that it's late in the day on a Friday over there, but I thank you for your time. So fundamentally, Titania is a cybersecurity company. We have software tools which are used to assess the security and or compliance of networking devices to determine whether or not they are inherently configured securely, and then to determine whether or not they are in compliance with, and you as the user determine which RMF or which security benchmarks you want to assess against. I've been with the company for a little over 3 years. Whilst the company is headquartered in the UK, I myself am based in Washington, DC. And my role is fundamentally to establish strategic relationships with both the reseller community, technology partners, but also with our customers. And Titania has a decent number of customers in the US government space. And so my job is to kind of help manage some of those relationships and try and grow our footprint here in the US.
Oh, good thing. Okay, I think so. Basically, one of the most important things that is currently happening in the US is, of course, the national cybersecurity strategy. I think there was a roadmap already set for it. It was a long time coming. That's there. So how happy are you with the kind of reforms that have come in? A lot of policies are revised. There are a lot more synergy that the governments are calling for among private companies and government and things like that. So just give me a basic understanding about what you personally feel about this.
About the strategy, yeah, sure. So as you say, I think the strategy has been a long time coming. The Biden administration has clearly dedicated a lot of time towards enhancing cybersecurity at a national level. And this is just a continuation of the executive orders that we've already seen in the last couple of years. But this strategy, I think, is significant because it really reflects a shift in the focus away from allowing commitments to cybersecurity from being voluntary or letting market forces dictate how industry in particular adopts cybersecurity and how it employs it. This is really now saying that requirements and adherence to standards are going to be the norm going forward. We've started seeing this already in some areas of the US government, but this is now really saying across the board, we're going to start seeing increased requirements for mandatory cybersecurity standards.
Right. So basically, this is just a very cyclical thing. The bandits come in, companies start following it. Usually, many of times, compliance and all these things are usually a list of checklists that companies have to just tick for better functioning. In case there is a problem, they are not held not liable. So things like that. So the culture of cybersecurity by design is still one of the crucial areas that several industries are have to attain. So what's your thought on that? How do you think this particular cybersecurity strategy is going to change that?
So I think what it's really going to do is it's really going to bring into focus the requirement in certain industries where they're not well-defined mandatory standards, or where there's lack of harmonization across mandatory standards. It's really going to bring that into focus. So yeah, just sort of finishing the thought. I think what we're going to start seeing is greater harmonization of minimum cybersecurity standards across different critical national infrastructure verticals. And I think in large part, many of the companies that are already within those verticals, by and large, have to adhere to some minimum standards already. And I think it's really just going to be a matter of perhaps increasing what those minimum standards are, enhancing them, and then ensuring that it's not, that we're seeing this across the board. I think the Biden administration is particularly, or is dedicating a lot more acute attention to this because of some of the very high profile breaches that have taken place over the past couple of years.
Right. So yes, I think there are a couple of points that we can probably start from. I think one of the reasons why there is so much of stress on this particular thing is basically the colonial pipeline attack, and protection around third party vendors. So do you also foresee a lot more collaboration when it comes to third party companies, now that the strategy ensures that there is a lot more understanding of cybersecurity concerns between them?
Yeah, I think it's definitely it's increasing focus on where liability sits with regards to not only I guess some of these large companies or large contractors, but also the third party companies that they work with themselves. So absolutely.
Great. Okay, so adding to that, I think one of the other thing was basically, again, you were also talking about harmonization between existing and existing reporting structure, and what the newer reporting requirements are going to be. So how exactly will that be done? But how exactly do you think, will it be a very seamless process, or there will be a lot more problems or impediments here?
So I don't know. That's all yet. That's all still unclear. However, I expect it to be a process that will look akin to how, under the Obama administration, they developed the National Cybersecurity Framework for critical national infrastructure. I think that you're going to see a lot of involvement from trade groups and trade organizations to help sort of inform the development of these minimum standards.
Right.
And I think it's important that industry, whilst they may not particularly like the idea of having standards imposed upon them, they have the opportunity to inform or influence them. And I expect that the government will sort of enable them to be able to do that.
So I think the new strategy also encourages a lot more participation, and I think a couple of discussion that came across was things like interim incentives that should be introduced. So what's your thought on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you have to have incentives in order to bring people to the table.
Right.
Some example. I mean, I think the first, I'm not even sure if you can call it an incentive, but perhaps we will for the purposes of this discussion. I mean, I think that the first incentive for industry to be an active participant in the development of these standards and the employment of them is the fact that it is in their own benefit. It is to their own benefit to ensure and enhance their cyber resiliency.
Right.
But beyond that, beyond the obvious, I suppose there's going to be your typical incentives related to better premiums for cyber insurance, which we know that are on the rise. Things like sort of, I guess, liability protections for organizations that are adopting these standards and reporting them correctly and accurately, which I know that is a key thing as part of this. It's all well and good to commit to doing something, but if you're not actually sort of implementing it and evidencing that, then it can be a moot point.
Okay. Now that you did also touch upon cyber insurance here, how will the new strategy affect the cyber insurance market? Do you foresee changes in insurance underwriting, or do you think there will be better adoption? and also, in terms of what do you call liability of data, where will that be?
Yeah, so I think, and I'm not an expert in this specific area, but my thoughts are that if we have an evidence-based approach to assessing and determining and reporting cybersecurity standards, that will give the insurance industry a lot more confidence when it comes to policy underwriting and understanding the risk that their customers are taking. So I see it as potentially, I see it as potentially a positive shift for the industry, because I think it's going to give them a lot more confidence in the data that they're going to be working off of.
Okay. And one more thing, do you find any drawbacks in this new strategy? Do you find any particular areas that the government did not have enough attention on, or do you think it's basically well placed and well thought of?
Well, I think with all government, I guess, policy statements, there are holes in it, or there are things, I guess, that can be more clearly expressed or more clearly defined. But I think ultimately it's the direction of travel is one that I am truly supportive of. I do believe that if we look at what has been employed in the past, it hasn't been working to the level that we need. And I think that a change of tack is required, and I think that this reflects that. But I would just the afterthought is really that, again, it's critical to have industry participation in it, through, in support of this. And whilst there has been some some murmurs of discontent from industry, I think by and large, I think once industry starts to recognize the benefits of not only participating at the outset, but then ultimately in the medium to long term, I think that they'll start to come around to it. And in particular for those companies that in principle are already, I guess, required or encouraged to meet what would be these minimum standards, they should start to see the compounding benefit of active participation.
Okay, so the next question is basically around CMMC. I haven't basically been following what is happening on that front, but then there was a lot of jeopardy, there was a lot of confusion, and then suddenly the new cybersecurity strategy has come in, and then it has not generally touched upon what is going to happen with the defense contractors. So, do you what is your basic understanding about this? Do you think there is going to be better attention towards CMMC, or probably there is an entirely new divide, and companies would be going towards adopting to this new revised strategy?
So I firstly, I applaud the Department of Defense for taking the action, and I recognize that there has been a review and revisions to the CMMC framework, but I applaud the Department of Defense for taking the initiative that they have under the Trump administration and recognizing that they cannot afford, both from a national security and an economic security perspective, for their defense industrial base to represent a soft underbelly from a cybersecurity perspective. So I applaud them for leaning into this. I don't know, but I would not be surprised if we start seeing, and I know it's different because the CMMC applies to defense contractors, so there's organizations doing business directly with the government. But I wouldn't be surprised to see if, and it's worth noting that the CMMC framework is largely derived from or based off of the NIST framework, NIST standard 171. And I wouldn't be surprised if we were to see NIST, and therefore what in effect is CMMC, become sort of, I guess, a baseline for what other companies or other verticals will start to employ. And I think it could ultimately trend in a direction where those sectors are reporting to their federal regulators compliance or performance against that, say in this case, the NIST framework, in the same way that these defense contractors have to report to the Department of Defense.
Nice. So basically, the idea is that probably this is going to be the standard cybersecurity guideline for industries across all verticals? Do you foresee something like that?
I don't think it would be. I think the individual agencies know their own verticals, well, certainly better than I do. But they
Right.
understand this. They understand that the cyber posture and the risk that their verticals face. What would be beneficial is if they can, if they're going to adopt minimum standards that they want their companies within that vertical to employ, it would make sense if there's commonality amongst and harmonization amongst those standards across the verticals, because there are multiple examples where you have a company or an organization that is going to find itself that's going to find itself subject to, or potentially finding itself being aligned to multiple verticals within critical national infrastructure.
Right.
So it makes sense that if they're going to be, whilst they may be reporting to different agencies, hopefully there's going to be harmonization between what it is that they're reporting to make the burden upon these companies as little as possible.
All right, I think I basically ran out of most of the questions that I had, Matt, because you were very quick in answering them. So any closing notes, by the way, if from
I just think, like I said at some point, I think that this strategy reflects, it's a positive sign. I think it's what has been in place hasn't been working as efficiently and effectively, and I think that we're starting to see that there's going to be increased regulation, and behind that regulation, there's going to be some teeth to it as well. So we've discussed a little bit the defense industrial base. We've already seen some high-profile examples of defense contractors being litigated against by the US government according to the False Claims Act, because they were not employing their required cybersecurity standards as they were required to by their contracts and by US law. I think that we're going to start seeing, in addition to this, these increased requirements, we are going to start seeing some more muscle from the US government in terms of ensuring that where organizations deviate or fall out of compliance, that they're held accountable for that.
Right. Okay. Thanks a ton, Matt. Really amazing talking to you. It was a really insightful and a good conversation.
Thank you, Augustine.